Would you take your scriptures and turn to 1 John chapter 3. We've been studying this little book, the Apostle John, through the summer. We find ourselves in chapter 3. The whole reason that John wrote this book is to make sure that those who say they follow him can know for sure that they are actually Christians. So we've entitled this, That You May Know. 1 John chapter 3, we'll read verse 11. For this is the message you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We must not be like Cain, who was from the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brother's righteous. Do not be astonished, brothers and sisters, that the world hates you. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love one another. Whoever does not love abides in death. All who hate a brother or sister are murderers. And you know that murderers do not have eternal life abiding in them. We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us. And we ought to lay down our lives for one another. How does God's love abide in anyone who has this world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses to help? Little children, let us love, not in word or speech, but in truth and action. This is God's word. I want you to imagine, first of all, before I say that, can you think of any group of people that Jesus would not find himself associating with? Is there a group of people if you can scan in your mind's eye the New Testament, do you see any group of people that Jesus would say, I will not associate with those people? Can you think of any? Now, the ones that he had the most conflict with, who are those folks? The Pharisees, the religious people. But you also know that he went to Simon the Pharisee's house for a meal. You remember that, right? I mean, there were times that he had conversations, very pleasant conversations with people like Nicodemus. There are times when he had social interactions with the Pharisees. When I scan the New Testament, I don't see anybody that Jesus recoiled from and said, I will not associate with you. And he's our leader. Okay. Let me read you, or think with you for a few moments about some frightening scenarios. Imagine, if you would, about the fact that you just perhaps found out that your son is a practicing homosexual. Or your mate has told you that he or she loves someone else and wants to divorce you. Or perhaps your daughter has run away again for the third time. Or maybe you've just been fired from your job. Or maybe your prescription drug habit is pushing you to the brink. Or maybe you've had a nervous breakdown. Or perhaps you struggle with mental illness. Or you've recently learned that though you are married, or though you are not married, you're pregnant. I remember one time, many years ago, I said something about like this, and I said, how would you feel, what would you do if you found out your son is a practicing homosexual? And the man, as soon as the sermon was over, he came down the aisle and he grabbed me by the hand and he said, I'll tell you what, I'd take my name away from him. Where do people who have had experiences like that, where do they go? Where do they go to feel embraced? What do you do when the bottom drops out of your life? Who can you turn to for understanding, for comfort, for affirmation and hope? I think churches need to be less like national shrines and more like local bars. Less like untouchable cathedrals and more like well-used hospitals. Places to bleed rather than monuments to look at. A place where you can take your mask off, let your hair down. Places where your wounds could be dressed and you could be cared for. Is there a place like that in the world? Is there a shelter, a place of refuge where you will be welcomed rather than judged? Yeah, there is. But often it is the local bar and not the local church. Bruce Larson and Keith Miller wrote this years ago. Let this sink in with you for a moment. Do I have that? I don't have that. Don't have that. Oh, I don't. I'm sorry, Chris, not your fault, my fault. Here's the quote. The neighborhood bar is possibly the best counterfeit there is to the fellowship Christ wants to give his church. It's an imitation, dispensing liquor instead of grace, escape rather than reality, but it is permissive, accepting, and an inclusive fellowship. It's unshockable, the local bar. It's democratic. You can tell people secrets, and they usually don't tell others, don't even want to. The bar flourishes not because most people are alcoholics, but because God has put it into the human heart, the desire to know and be known, to love and be loved. And so many seek a counterfeit at the price of a few beers. With all my heart, I believe that Jesus wants his church to be a fellowship where people can come in and say, I'm tired, I'm confused, I'm beat up, I've had it, I can't go on. End quote. That's not true in a lot of churches. That's true in a lot of bars, though. But Jesus came to create a new community, a community that embraces rather than excludes. How are we doing with that? How are you doing with that? I want to walk you through this text just a little bit this morning. Will you embrace or will you exclude? Now, this is going to get a little hard, a little uncomfortable, but that's okay, right? You all love me, don't you? Most of you do. Look at what he says in verse 11. For this is the message you've heard from the beginning. I mean, this is nothing new, John says. This is nothing new. That we should what? Love one another. We must not be like Cain, who was from the evil one, murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his deeds were evil and his brothers were righteous. Do not be astonished, brothers and sisters, that the world hates you. That shouldn't shock any of you. We know that we've passed from death to life because we love one another. Whoever does not love abides in death. All who hate a brother or sister are murderers, and you know that murderers do not have eternal life abiding in them. So John asked this central question. Will we be people who embrace, or will we be people who exclude others from our heart and from our love? Will we take others into our hearts, and will we embrace them? Now, John is contrasting an Old Testament story that the people that would have read this letter would have read in Sunday school too, right? About Cain and Abel, and we've talked about that last spring. But this story of Cain and Abel, you remember Cain was Adam and Eve's first child, and they were so excited about this child, and they were prepared, and they had the nursery all decorated, and they bought new stuff that I don't know who threw the shower for them, but it was an impressive time for them. They were so excited about that, and yet another brother came along, Abel, and we don't get a lot about Abel. Abel was, you would think Cain would have said, oh, I get a playmate. I get somebody that I can go in the backyard with and build forts. I got somebody I can play catch with. I've got somebody I can tell secrets to. You would think Cain would be excited about the arrival of his little brother. But Cain was not excited, was he? Cain started to resent his little brother. Cain started to feel distance between his little brother. In fact, his little brother became an enemy. And of all places, when they went to worship, they go to worship and they brought their offerings to God, and it was at that place where Cain had it in his heart that he was going to do away with his little brother. Something had happened in his heart against his brother. Anger, bitterness, resentment started to find root there. And at that worship experience where God received the offering of Abel and did not receive the offering of Cain, Cain hatches a plan to do away with his brother. Brotherhood was intended to be a gift, but it became the grounds for sobering rivalry and jealousy. Cain and Abel began to play who's the most loved, who's the most valued, who's the most righteous before God game. And that became the battleground that ended in Abel's death. How many have a brother? All right? I had a brother. I still have him. He's still my brother. One thing you can't do is get rid of your brother. Well, I guess you can. Cain did here. But I have a brother that's a year younger than me. His name is Jay. Some of you remember him from being here last year. I love my brother. I loved him when I was a little boy. I love him as a full-grown man. I love my brother. But at the same time, he's my brother, so that also meant I hated him. Right? There are times. One time, my mother, when I was about 6 years old, asked me to go out and gather the eggs out of the chicken coop. It was the summertime, so I took my shirt off and used it to make a basket. So I'm in where the hens are, and I'm pulling eggs out. My back is towards the opening of the chicken coop. I did not know this, but my little brother had captured one of those hens and was sneaking up behind me. And as I'm bending over pulling eggs out of nests, he takes that hen and throws it onto my back. I don't know if you imagine what a hen will do at that point, but she started to climb up my back. She flapped her wings and slapped me in the face and made noises that came from another world. I still have bad dreams about this. I turned around and there was my redheaded brother laughing at me. Well, that infuriated me more. I chased him into the garage. I picked up a short-handled hoe, and I started to beat it into the ground, screaming all along, I'm going to hit you with this. I'm going to hit you with this. The end of that hoe is really worn and slick. I'm going to hit you with this. Oh, it flew across the garage and landed above his eye, and then laid it over his eye. The arterial spray of blood was impressive all over the inside of that barn. I felt like I was in a bad Stephen King novel. Not Children of the Corn, but Children of the Chicken Coop, you know. We have since patched up that breach in our relationship. But brothers can go at each other. You know that. But the intention of brotherhood is for them to also come together. You're a family. To love one another. And John is saying, do not be like Cain. Do not be like Joe. Brotherhood is a place for loving embrace. But often it's a battleground. The irony in this story is that Cain kills his brother over the issue of worship. Over worship. Now, you may never have acted out your vengeance the way Cain did or the way I did at 6 years old. But every one of us have had anger in our heart. Am I right about that? If you haven't, then you lie about other stuff. We've had anger in our hearts. But John says, for this is the message that you've heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. Every moment of every day we decide in 1,000 ways if we're going to exclude other people or embrace other people. Are we going to welcome people or shut them out? An author that I admire has written a book. It's not even out yet, but I got an advance copy. It's called Us Versus Them, Freedom from a Faith That Feeds on Making Enemies. And he says this, I think I do have this quote. Conservative Christians are marginalized in progressive groups, and progressive Christians are marginalized in conservative groups. And so we're all silenced. This may come as a shock to some of you, but did you know that on the progressive side of politics there are Christians? Did you know that? That love Jesus with all their heart? Almost 3 years ago, I was sitting in a group, and the topic came up about the crazy women that were marching in demonstrations all over the country. A lot of derogatory statements were being tossed about these young women, these liberals, these radical feminists, these socialists. They were just, the vitriol was just flying in this group. I sat there and listened to these men, mostly, condescending about these women who were entitled and millennials this and millennials that, and a pain started to grow in my heart. And the reason the pain was in my heart is because one of my daughters-in-law was at one of those protests. So all that was being said about those feminists, those liberals, those socialists, was being said about somebody I love. This is in a Christian setting. Not very embracing, not very loving. We are not a very embracing people. It's always easier to gravitate towards those you already know and who see the world the way you see it. I have in my own family, my own personal family, members of my family who will not talk to each other. Do you know that? You probably have this in yours too, at some point. That they don't talk to each other. And why? There are things that they cannot talk about in the family. They're all Christians, but they can't talk together. They started to not associate with one another. They started to avoid in a family of Christians. I don't find anything Christ-like about that. Jesus was willing to go to the Simon the Pharisee's house. He was also willing to go to someone's home who had less than that kind of a reputation. Jesus was willing to have conversations with just about anybody. But we don't do that. John's concerned about that. You need to love. You need to embrace brothers and sisters in Christ. Barbara Brown Taylor said this, "The problem is many of the people in need of saving are in the churches. And at least part of what they need saving from is the idea that God sees the world the same way they do." Come on, that's pretty good. A heart alive with God's love wants to reach out and embrace. But when there are people around you from other races, from other backgrounds, how comfortable are you reaching out and embracing them? It's all about choices. When I have bitterness in my heart towards a brother or a sister, I know the fact is that God wants me to reconcile. He wants me to embrace. I can come up with 1,000 reasons why I shouldn't. But I do know the truth. And the truth is there's not a human being on the planet that Jesus does not want the Christ follower to embrace, especially if they're Christians. Henry Nouwen said, "Community is the place where the person I least want to be there is always there." That'll sneak up on you a little bit, I think. One of the striking things about Jesus is that he didn't work real hard to make sure that he put together a little church where everyone was naturally compatible with each other. He didn't work hard at that at all. In the 3rd chapter of Mark, you can look there some other time, there's a list of the people who were in Jesus' little church, his little group, his disciples. One of them was a man named Simon the Zealot. I don't know if you know what a zealot is, But a zealot was an extremist, nationalist political party in Israel at that time. They were committed to the overthrow of the Roman government by any means possible, violence if necessary, and sometimes assassinations. That's Simon the Zealot. They hated the Romans. The only people they hated more than the Romans were the people who corroborated with the Romans, who cooperated with them, like tax collectors, who were Jewish people who were willing to work with the Romans in order to get corrupt financial gain. Zealots were freedom fighters or terrorists, depending on your political point of view. And then Jesus comes along and says, I'm going to put a group together. And then he starts to choose the members of that group. And he looks at Simon and he says, Simon, you're a zealot. You despise the Romans. You despise all those who cooperate like tax collectors. I'll take you to be in my group. Then he looks to Matthew and he says, hey, Matthew, you're a despised tax collector. You cooperate with the Romans. I'm going to let you room with Simon. You guys should have some interesting conversations. They were all a part of the same little group. What did they have in common? Their political opinions? No. Their political strategies? No. Their value systems? No. What did they have in common? They all loved who? They loved Jesus. And because Jesus loved them and embraced them, did not exclude them, but embraced them, they learned that you can reach across divides and give hugs and love. You can, if Jesus is at the center. You know, John might well have written this. Beloved, embrace the geeks. Embrace the nerds. Embrace the wimps. Embrace those who have dandruff and blemishes and all manner of bad breath. Embrace those who have no fashion sense. Embrace the uncoordinated. Embrace the middle managers. Embrace the wrinkled. Embrace the anxious. Embrace the unemployed. Embrace the river rats. Embrace the homeless. Embrace the deplorables. Embrace the refugees. Embrace the chronically angry. Embrace the liberals. Embrace the sexually addicted and sexually frustrated. Embrace the mentally ill. Embrace the HIV positive. Embrace the parents who failed. Embrace the children who ran away. Embrace the divorced. Embrace the barren. Embrace the pregnant out of wedlock. Embrace the failures. Embrace, embrace, embrace. Never stop embracing. Why? Because they matter to Jesus. And if they matter to Jesus, they matter to us. We are to be a community who embraces and includes each other, not a body that's filled with hatred and exclusion. That's why John emphasizes that how do you know that the love of God is living inside of you? Because that love wants to escape your soul and your body and get on everybody that you come across. That's how you know that the love of God is in you. It wants to escape and get on everybody. And that's what churches should be like. Maybe we should write a new hymn. You know, maybe with some words like these from a TV show of the 80s. Some of you will not know this, but some of you will. Making your way in the world today takes everything you've got. Taking a break from all your worries, it sure would help a lot. Wouldn't you like to get away? Sometimes you want to go where what? You pagans watch television. You watch TV shows about a bar. Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name and they're always glad you came. You want to be where you can see the troubles are all the same You want to be where everybody knows your name. That should be a song about the Church of Jesus Christ, not the local bar. And so, Mountain Heights Baptist Church, may we continue on our journey to be more and more welcoming to those who don't look like us, don't act like us, don't dress like us, so that we can be a community that embraces. And if we are going to have a reputation, may our reputation be those Christians, they sure do love one another. They really do. Thank you, Jesus, for showing us the way. Thank you for loving us the way you do. May we be busy releasing that keeps us from loving. Would you fill us up so much with your love that it just bursts through the seams of our souls and sloshes on everyone that gets in our way. My, how they love one another. Would that be said of us?